Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of This Week in Football. Today, we are just a few days away from the postseason beginning. The regular season has concluded as we finished up just last Sunday. We had a bit of a break for the holidays, but we're back to talk about the postseason because it is the most exciting time of the year. My name is Andrew Howe, joined alongside Xavier. Xavier? How was your winter break?
My winter break was awesome. How's yours?
It was pretty fun. I definitely got to watch a lot of football, a lot of NFL, and then a lot of college football as well as the playoffs and all the bowl games were happening. So you never had a day without some good football to watch, and I'm excited for this little string of days too because we got the college football semifinals today, and then we got all the wild card rounds happening this weekend too.
Yeah, and I'm gonna be cheering for Penn State today when they play Notre Dame.
Oh, really? Okay. I kind of like Notre Dame. I think they run the ball well, but I heard some of their players were a little sick, so hopefully that's not going to be too big of a problem for them. But without further ado, let's just recap the last couple of weeks, Xavier, because I guess starting from like the Christmas game with the Chiefs and the Steelers all the way up to the end of the regular season, we got a lot of really good regular season football to wrap up this season. What were some of your biggest and most favorite games and stories from this last couple of weeks?
Well, obviously the Bengals made a run, but of course, the Broncos demolished the Chiefs, so they couldn't get in, which is kind of sad. They still finished the season with a winning record, and if they just made the playoffs, that would have been an amazing run. And they still closed out the season with winning 5 games in a row. So
Yeah, I was definitely rooting for the Bengals at the end of it because it was really fun to watch Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and Chase Brown and T. Higgins. That whole offense just moving so well together. Mike Gesicki also like has had a really good end of the season. And their last two games were, I think, some of the best games of each of the last 2 weeks. Of course, their Saturday game against the Broncos that went into overtime. T. Higgins with 3 touchdowns, and the Bengals leading that comeback towards the end. And then Bo Nix like launching absolute nukes down the field as well to try to tie up the game. Like that was such a fun back and forth game. And then last week we saw them play against the Steelers in what was also a really close game. Didn't feel very close until the very end, but the Steelers made it a little bit competitive, even though Russell Wilson and the offense just didn't really have a great day.
yeah, it felt like it was kind of like a mid-scoring game. It felt like a really low-scoring game. I mean, both offenses didn't really get into like a really powerful rhythm, I would say. But in the end, the Bengals came up with a win. But in the end, it also didn't matter because Broncos won 38-0, and the Chiefs kind of let them win.
I know it was so close to being really exciting, and then unfortunately at the end, the Chiefs they deserved the opportunity to rest their starters, obviously because they had such a great regular season, but it just meant the Broncos were able to absolutely destroy them, and the Bengals didn't really have an opportunity. But if the Bengals wanted a better opportunity, they should have won one of those earlier games in the season, whether it was one of the overtime games against the Ravens or that Week 1 game against the Patriots. A lot of missed opportunities there for them.
And the Patriots would have gotten the number 1 pick if they would have made the playoffs. So that would
Yeah.
have been a good trade.
Definitely. Some of my other fun stories that I enjoyed watching throughout the last couple of weeks, the NFC South race, I thought got really exciting down to the wire. The battle between the Falcons and the Buccaneers to see who was going to get in. Of course, you saw the Falcons take a bit of a risk by starting Michael Penix for the rest of the regular season. On Sunday Night Football in Week 17, they played against the Washington Commanders. That game went to overtime. A really back and forth shootout between both him and Jaden Daniels, who were the two Heisman finalists last year. That was a really great game. And then it came down to Week 18, Xavier, where the Panthers had to play against the Falcons, and then the Buccaneers needed to play against the Saints. If the Bucks won, they made it into the playoffs, and they just barely ended up doing so.
Yeah, they only won by 8 points to the Saints. And I mean, I was really cheering for Michael Penix there. Rookie quarterback coming in, he go on a run. But again, Buccaneers offense and defense is all very well rounded and ended up coming out and beating the Saints. But I thought the Panthers Falcons game was really fun. Um, and yeah, Bryce Young played an amazing game in that one, but the Falcons ended up losing, even though it didn't matter at the end.
Yeah, 5 touchdowns for Bryce Young in that game. Hey, well, that's a pretty good redemption arc for for him, right? Because we remember we talked earlier in the season about him being benched, and then he ended up coming back, and people were wondering if he could be a starting quarterback in this league. But he led the Panthers to a pretty good end of the season. They actually did not finish last in the division because of tiebreakers. The Panthers actually finished ahead of the Saints in the NFC South, and I think if you're a Panthers fan, there's a lot to look forward to with this team.
Yeah, there definitely is. And I mean, I think you got a franchise quarterback in Bryce Young, to what he's proven around the end of the season. And they have a lot of good young players, I think. And if they can get the team together, I think they could, in a few years, become a playoff worthy team.
Yeah, definitely. Last note about the regular season games before we move on to looking ahead to the playoffs, because another team was in the hunt to making it into the postseason, but just barely missed out, and that was the Miami Dolphins. They lost 32-20 against the New York Jets, where Aaron Rodgers, in what could have been his last game as a Jet, threw for 4 touchdowns and 1 interception, arguably his best game as a New York Jet. And in the other news, we had some drama with Tyreek Hill, who apparently stopped playing after the rest of the game, and then had a press conference where he talked about how he might want out. But then we just heard another report that said that maybe Tyreek Hill is going to be staying. What are your thoughts about the Dolphins situation or about the Jets as well? Because two very interesting teams in terms of what they're going to be doing going into the
Well,
offseason.
well, in Tyreek Hill's situation, it's just kind of crazy. He opted to sit out in the other game, and of course, the team didn't like that. But then he says he wants out on the team. But I mean, like, if he's just saying he wants out, and he's saying like, "Oh, I missed a playoff my first time," he didn't necessarily have a great year, so you can't really blame it on the team for that one. But I get why he wants to go on a different team. He wants to have a better chance of actually getting back into the playoffs. And the Aaron Rodgers, his last game was the best game. I thought he played amazing, and we'll see what happens if he leaves the leagues or not. That will be interesting in off season.
Yeah, Devonte Adams actually ended up having a decent end of the season as well. I hope that the Jets end up keeping both him and Garrett Wilson, even if that means that Aaron Rodgers is going to leave, because I think there were some reports that Garrett Wilson didn't want to play with Aaron Rodgers next year, and so the Jets kind of have to have a decision to make here in terms of who they want to keep. I would definitely try to just look for a new quarterback. Somebody like Justin Fields is probably available, or you could go, maybe a different route with like a Sam Darnold, or there's a lot of different quarterback options that could be pretty interesting for the Jets. But I do think moving on from Aaron Rodgers is probably the best move for both parties. And I'm very curious to see what the Dolphins do because obviously it wasn't the end of the season that they wanted. They ended up going 8-9, but having a above 500 record with Tua starting for them. Do you think that what do you think needs to change with this team?
Well, definitely the offense was definitely not as powerful. You never really got Jalen Waddle or Tyreek Hill engaged in like a big part of the offense, and Tua didn't have his best year. So I think you really just need to get Tua. Tua's got to play better next year for more like playoffs. Tua's got to play better. He's got to throw it, and Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle better play better if Tyreek Hill returns next season.
Yeah. The Miami defense wasn't actually that half bad this season. It was just a lot of the offense kind of being stagnant. Huntley had one good game against the Browns last week, but it just really wasn't ever really put together unless Tua was on the field. And so hopefully he can stay healthy, and the Dolphins can get something going, and end up revamping their offense a little bit because when they were a good team a couple of years ago, they were one of the most fun teams to watch in the National Football League. But that's about it for the regular season. Let's move on right now to the MVP conversation, Xavier, because that has become a big topic of conversation, especially in these last 2 weeks. Obviously, there's the big debate between Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen, but some other people maybe making their way into the conversation as well. You can make an argument maybe for Joe Burrow, Saquon Barkley, Jared Goff. What are your thoughts overall about the MVP race in the NFL?
Well, right now, I think Josh Allen deserves to win it just because how hard carried his offense is and how hard it's run through him. I would say Lamar Jackson, nonetheless, if he didn't have Derrick Henry or he didn't have a really good defense. Um, but right now, I think Josh Allen's my favorite. And also it's great to see Saquon up there in the rankings. And but I just think he doesn't have enough to beat two stellar quarterbacks this season. So.
Were you mad about that Saquon sat out the last game to instead of trying to get the all-time rushing yards record, or were you okay with trying to save him for the playoffs?
Well, I mean, I wanted him to beat it, but then my dad, he was like, "Oh, we should just rest him." So I get both sides of arguments, but I think it was a decent job to rest him. But he only needed like 100 yards, so if you just put him in there for like a bit of the game, he could maybe.
Yeah, I mean there were a
Yeah.
couple of players that got injured in the last week of the season. The biggest one being Zay Flowers, who we'll talk about in a little bit. But it's always a risk that you put out there. And so even though the record would have been nice, definitely understand the Eagles' perspective because their main goal is not to get Saquon Barkley the record; it's to win the Super Bowl. So they get their best chance of doing that by resting Saquon that week. But in terms of the MVP. I mean, I really love what Lamar Jackson's done this season. He's the first quarterback ever to throw for over 4,000 passing yards and run for over 800 yards in the same season. And it's just been incredible setting up his players just with his incredible athleticism and scrambling ability. But I think the narratives are just too much to overcome for Josh Allen. I think he's probably just going to run away with it. I think the biggest thing that you have to remember when you're looking at the numbers between these two guys is that as you mentioned, Josh Allen's receiving core of, Khalil Shakir, Amari Cooper, and Keon Coleman, probably not as strong as, a Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman, as Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely. So he's definitely in a harder position to succeed offensively and also led the Bills to the number 2 seed in the AFC. And also, when you look at the actual sheer numbers, Xavier, you have to remember that Josh Allen didn't actually play that many games. Like, he played less quarters or actual snaps because the Bills were winning so much that he ended up sitting like second halves and fourth quarters of a lot of different games. So he's not going to be able to build up that same number of yards as somebody compared to somebody like Lamar. Just like how Joe Burrow, because his team was always losing, always had to keep throwing the ball, which is why his passing yards numbers kept going up.
Yeah, that is an interesting point that you brought out. Because Joe Burrow, they couldn't really run the ball in like fourth quarter situations when there was one possession games. So he really had to throw the ball a lot. And for Lamar, they were in some tight games, and of course they had the worst record. So mostly in like fourth quarters when they're up by a ton, they mostly run the ball with James Cook rather than pass it. So that's a point you could have to why Josh Allen could win.
Yeah, I think he's probably the favorite right now, although I would be very happy to see Lamar also win it because I think he's had a very deserving season as well. Last thing to talk about before we get to the playoff discussions is the draft, NFL draft, because the first part of that at least has been finalized with the conclusion of the regular season. There was a situation where the Giants could have won the number one pick, and then they beat the Colts, or the Patriots to earn the number one pick, and then they beat the Bills at the end of the season. But it ends up being number one Tennessee, number two Cleveland, number three New York Giants, number four New England, and number five Jacksonville. Overall, Xavier, out of like all the teams that missed the playoffs, who are you looking at as being excited about? Both because of the draft position that they ended up in, as well as some of the pieces that ended up doing good towards the end of the year.
Well, I'm kind of interested to see the Cleveland Browns because if they end up drafting like a guy like Shador Sanders and he ends up being a good quarterback, they do have Jerry Judy and well, I if they because they've never really had that of a great quarterback. But last year when they did Joe Flacco, they played really well. So I'll be excited to see if they draft a star quarterback and like Shador Sanders and he ends up being good.
Yeah,
Their defense is also really solid. So
I'm actually very curious to see what the Browns end up doing because they are kind of in a weird spot where they are paying, one of their quarterbacks, Deshaun Watson, like so much money, and he's going to be on the team probably for the next couple of years. Like, do you decide to just draft a quarterback anyway? I think you probably do, but the Browns are definitely thinking about that. Maybe there's a situation where if you're a team like New York and you want to leverage something, you can try to pull off a trade with Cleveland, and the Browns can maybe get some extra picks.
Yeah, that's very smart for them because knowing that they might get a quarterback if the Giants do, because this quarterback draft class isn't that great. So really, the only top two guys that you would want to be picking in the first round would be Shadur and Cam Ward. Uh, so right now, the New York Giants is the third pick. I think they would go. They'll be going to pick Travis Hunter, um, just because of his both ways and to apply to their offense, and they're also need of a corner.
Yeah, I honestly think the Giants ending up at the third pick could be a bit of a blessing in disguise for them because this is a weak quarterback pool, and the arguments could be that next year's quarterback pool could be even better, especially if somebody like, Drew Aller decides to stay in college for another year. You'll also have, a ton of other options, just that are that need another year or so. Nico from Tennessee. I'm just, Jackson Dart. I think he's gonna maybe be in this draft class, but there's a lot of other players that are potentially higher tiered prospects that could be quarterbacks drafted in 2026. And so the Giants, if Tennessee and Cleveland both select quarterbacks, would be prime position to draft Travis Hunter, pair him alongside Malik Neighbors, as well as Singletary and Tyron Tracy. Like that offensive core is all of a sudden very, very good. You can draft a bridge. You can sign a bridge quarterback like a Justin Fields for a couple of years, revamp some of your defense, and all of a sudden that's not a bad team. And even if it is a bad team, you can always bank on tanking again and then getting yourself back into the quarterback pool for the next year. So I actually kind of like where the Giants are at. And I think there's a situation where even if you need a quarterback, it's maybe better for them to just draft the best player available, especially if you're not going to be forced to try and decide if Tennessee and Cleveland both select quarterbacks.
Yeah, I really like the position that the New York Giants are in right now, just because of him with Malik Neighbors, and of course you got the running backs. Their offense is all of a sudden pretty good, and you also got him on defense. And like you said, if they just revamp the defense and get like a quarterback for like 2 years, like Justin Fields, I think they could. And if the players work out, they could end up being a playoff team.
Definitely, and it'll be fun to watch as the draft ends up going down in I think 3 months or so, and sometime in the middle of April. So we'll keep our eyes on that in a little bit. But for now, it's time to turn our attention towards the postseason because the first round of Wild Card Weekend starts this Saturday at 4:30. We've got 6 games on the docket. Of course, congratulations to our number one seeds being the Chiefs in the AFC, and in the NFC we got the Detroit Lions who got it with that win over Minnesota on Sunday Night Football. But right now, it leaves us here with our matchups in the first round. In the AFC, it's Chargers versus Texans, then Steelers Ravens, and then Broncos Bills. While in the NFC, it's your Eagles playing the Packers, then Bucks Commanders, and then Vikings Rams. I guess we'll just go in chronological order here, Xavier. Let's go through each matchup, talk about it a little bit, and then we can each give our predictions. Let's start off with the Chargers against the Texans, our first game of Wild Card Weekend this Saturday at 4:30.
Well, right now I'm immediately thinking Chargers just because I'm not the CJ Stroud hasn't been playing so great, and the Chargers offense has been worthy of winning big games, and I really think they're gonna win this game. My prediction for this game will be I'm gonna say Chargers 27, Houston 17.
Okay. I, think that, overall, so many people are favoring the Chargers right now. Obviously, the Texans really stumbled into the end of that regular season. They lost 31-2 on Christmas to the Baltimore Ravens and just weren't generally considered very highly, especially with, Tank Dell and Stephon Diggs now being injured for them. Joe Mixon really hasn't done too much for them down the stretch either. So, CJ Stroud needs to definitely have a good game for this to be competitive, but I agree with you. I really like what the LA Chargers have done this season. Their offense looks incredible with those rookies, Joe Alt and Lad McConkey, that have been brought in. Justin Herbert, I think, is playing some of the best football he's ever played. And so I'm really looking forward to watching this Chargers team play. Their defense also looking great, especially in that last game versus the Vegas Raiders. So I think I have the Chargers winning this one as well. fun fact, Xavier, the last time Jim Harbaugh played in Houston, you want to guess when it was? The
No
last time
idea.
Jim Harbaugh coached a game in Houston, Texas at the stadium was 1 year ago when Michigan won the national championship. So it's been about a
Ooh,
year since he came back. So he's done
stadium.
pretty well in that stadium at NRG. I'm going to say the Chargers win this one 31-14. I don't think it's particularly close. Okay, let's move
Uh,
on to our next game. Do you have anything else to say about the Chargers, or are we ready to move on?
no, not
Okay. AFC North matchup between the Steelers and the Ravens. We just saw them play, I think, a couple of weeks ago, but the Ravens overall on absolute fire. They split the season series, but Baltimore won the most recent game. That was during the holidays. It was a pretty one-sided game in favor of the Ravens, and of course, they're going to be at home this time around against Pittsburgh. What are your thoughts about overall what you think about these guys?
Well, I believe in the Ravens in this one, just because they're blazing hot, and the Steelers in the past on the end stretch of games they haven't looked that great. Um, and people might say the Steelers are Ravens kryptonite, but they've just beat them on a Saturday a few weeks ago. So I'm taking the Ravens with a pretty strong win. I just don't believe in Russell Wilson in this offense, and he can get it going. So I'm gonna say Ravens 30, Steelers 17.
Yeah, yeah, the Steelers were playing really good football at the start of the year, but the last 4 weeks of the season, ever since Baltimore came off of that bye, they've won 4 games in a row. Meanwhile, Pittsburgh has lost 4 games in a row. So that is a very steep difference. And obviously, the Steelers' schedule was very difficult. They wrapped up their season playing against Philadelphia, Baltimore, Kansas City, and Cincinnati. But you definitely could tell, especially in those last 2 weeks, the Chiefs game on Christmas and then the Bengals game last Saturday, that Russell Wilson and that offense really has lost some of its magic to the point where I know this is the third time I'm mentioning Justin Fields in this episode, Xavier, but I could see a world where they try to mix things up a little bit. Mike Tomlin was going back and forth between those guys a decent amount, especially like towards the middle of the season, and then ever since that we've gone down the stretch, it's been mostly Russ. I think especially against Baltimore, where their secondary has really become strengthened ever since they moved Kyle Hamilton back to that safety position. Um, I think that maybe using Justin Fields as like a running option could be an option for Pittsburgh, but I still think Baltimore is just absolutely on fire. The one caveat is that Zay Flowers is not going to be playing in this game, which means that that's one less weapon for Lamar to look with.
Yeah, definitely. I still believe just because they have Derrick Henry, I think their offense will still be as good just because you have an MVP worthy quarterback in Derrick Henry.
Yeah. So you think Baltimore's going to win this one? What's your prediction for the score?
Uh, 30 to 17.
Okay. My take is that actually the Steelers defense might actually come to play a little bit, and they're gonna make it a close game and maybe a low scoring game in the cold. But I'll still have Baltimore winning this one. I think 16-13 will be the final score between those two teams. Let's move on to our last matchup in the AFC playoffs. It'll be the Denver Broncos playing up against the Buffalo Bills in Orchard Park. The Bills, of course, getting a semi-bye week as they got to rest a lot of their players against New England last week, but still in a position where they are looking very good against Denver, who has maybe had a slow ending to their regular season. Who do you think is favored in this one, and what are your thoughts of the matchup as a whole?
I think the Bills are definitely favored as one just because they're home and their offense really powerful. They got a bye week. Even though the Broncos beat the Chiefs 38-0, the Chiefs were resting all of their starters. Uh, I think Bo Nix could put on a good game. It could end up potentially being close. I see how some people think this is going to be a blowout, or some people think it's going to be a close game. Um, I think it's going to be a relatively close game, but I still have the Bills winning this one. I'm going to say actually by 10 points. Um, I'm going to say Bills 30, Broncos 20.
Okay. Yeah, the Denver Broncos defense has been obviously a huge story throughout the entire season, whether it's Nick Benito or Pat Surtain, but that
Can't really do anything.
yeah, I mean the Bills on the other side, they are just a really really good team, but The Broncos offense honestly has been doing pretty good as well. People talked about Bo Nix checking down the ball a lot, but you've seen in those last couple of games, he's really been able to air some out and find some really deep passes. You think about that Monday Night Football game against the Browns about a month ago, where he found some really long passes, and same thing in this Cincinnati Bengals game a couple weeks ago with Marvin Mims getting two touchdowns in that game. So. I'm kind of interested to see if the Broncos can bring anything, but I do think it's probably still the Bills winning this one. But I will say, I think they're gonna make it close. I'm gonna say final score 27-21. Buffalo's gonna take it. Okay, let's move on to the NFC now, Xavier. We'll start with your Philadelphia Eagles as they take on the Packers. A rematch of the first game of the regular season for those guys in Brazil. Green Bay, obviously, stumbling a little bit at the end of the year. They lost to the Bears in their last week of the regular season. Not 100% sure what Jordan Love's status is for this game, but are you worried as an Eagles fan, or do you think you guys are gonna take this one pretty easily?
I think we got this.
Okay. Hey, I mean, last regular season, you guys, last year you guys ended on a pretty bad road, and had a tough playoff loss.
Different this year.
Why is it different this year, do you think?
We have Saquon.
Okay, that's a good argument. Actually, it's a very good argument that you guys have Saquon Barkley. Um, any thoughts on the Packers? What are you most worried about for them?
Well, the Packers, obviously your defense pretty good, but you got Jair Alexander out. But Jordan Love, I think he's a bit shaken up, but he's still probably gonna play. Um, well, their team is a little banged up. I'm still just worried that because of course they contend in a lot of games because their offense has proven score a lot of points and to keep up with like teams like the Lions. And so yeah, that's like really my only worry if they just like come back because their defense is solid, and I think their offense can make comebacks.
Yeah.
Um, I still got the Eagles in this one. Um, Jalen Hurts, not too worried, but I saw AJ Brown did not practice today, but hopefully he can suit up for the game. I'm gonna say the Eagles. I think it's gonna be a close one though. I'm gonna say Eagles 31-24.
Okay, I think we're gonna need to see a big game from Josh Jacobs and Jaden Reed. Jaden Reed hasn't done too much in the last couple of weeks for Green Bay, so hopefully, with some extra rest and things like that, we'll have a good game against Philadelphia. I still think it's gonna be the Eagles, though. We've been aligned on all of our predictions so far. I'm gonna say the Eagles win this one. Yeah, let's say 31-13. Let's go to our next game here. Going to be the Commanders Bucks on Sunday night. Uh, I feel like this is going to be a really fun game.
Yeah, this is. I think it's gonna be the best game of the week.
So this was a matchup that was a rematch of Week 1. Washington lost to Tampa Bay 37-20. However, it was the first game of Jaden Daniels' career. Obviously, he's had a lot of more time to play since then. But the Buccaneers offense continuing to look very good, even though they struggled a little bit in the first half against New Orleans. But I think the Commanders also on a pretty good roll to wrap up the year. Who do you think is favored in this one? It's kind of a tough question.
It's really tough to say, but man, I don't know. It's just gonna be such a good game. I think the teams are perfectly even just because of the strength of the defenses and the offenses. Um, you can do your prediction first.
Okay, well, I do think that both defenses aren't very good. I do think that both offenses are very good. So I think it's going to be a high scoring game, like a shootout, like we saw with the Commanders against the Bengals earlier in the season, or with the Bucks. I think the Bucks Falcons game was also like a big shootout a couple weeks ago, or is it towards the start of the year? But I'm
Yeah,
gonna say my first upset. I'm gonna say the Commanders win this one. I'm gonna say 35 to 33 or something like that. Just because I really like what Terry McLaurin has done this year. I think Brian Robinson's gonna, get some time and hopefully play pretty well. Zach Ertz also playing really well for Washington so far, and I think we're gonna see like a vintage Jaden Daniels performance. Even though I really love what the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have done on the offensive end as well.
Yeah. Um, I really like both teams. Of course, both offenses are so good. Um, I'm gonna take. I'm. I'm gonna take the. I'm actually gonna go with the Commanders. Same with you. Now all our picks are aligned. I'm gonna say the Commanders just because their offense. I think they're gonna get hot. And Jan Daniels, I think he can come in here with the right mindset and absolutely tear up the Buccaneers defense. And I think he definitely has the chance to play amazing, obviously, because Bucks defense isn't the best. I'm gonna say the Commanders. It's definitely gonna be a close one, no matter what. Um, I'm gonna say the Commanders win this one, 28-24. And actually, a higher score, 35-31.
Okay, so pretty close to my score prediction as well. I think we're both on the same page that it's going to be a lot of points scored, and the Commanders and the Buccaneers are going to be throwing a lot of touchdowns. Our last game on Monday night, Xavier, Minnesota Vikings against the Los Angeles Rams at SoFi Stadium. So the Vikings, despite winning 14 games this season, have to go on the road to face off against Matt Stafford and the Rams. Um, Vikings offense maybe exposed a little bit in that last game that they played against Detroit. I think Sam Darnold definitely did not look incredibly comfortable in that game. However, a lot of track record between the regular season for them. What do you think about this matchup? Do you think the Vikings still have it and are going to go on a run?
Um, this either is what I think. Either the Vikings beat the Rams and go on a run playoff, or they either lose and Sam Darnold doesn't play great. So I think just because of some Sam Darnold performance, I just think he might turn into Jets Sam Darnold, just because I don't know if he really has that dog in him to play an amazing game in the playoffs and beat the Rams that are just blazing hot. Even though they lost to Seattle, um, and the Vikings schedule, they do have 14 wins, but their schedule was relatively easy. So I think like in a real world, they should probably be like 11-6 or 10-7. But I'm gonna take the Los Angeles Rams in this one. I still think it's gonna be a close game, just because they have Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. Their defense is good, so their defense can hold up the Rams if necessary. I'm gonna take the Rams, uh, 24-17.
Okay. Well, I'm not gonna lie. I was leaning towards the Rams for a little bit, but I think it'd be boring if we were along the line for every single one of our predictions. So this is where I'm gonna go for the Vikings. My dad's a bit of a Vikings fan, so he'll be happy about that as well. I love this Rams offense. With Kyron Williams and Puka Nacua just playing out of their mind. Matt Stafford has a historical track record of being amazing when it goes to the postseason, but I think Minnesota's still going to pack a punch. Their defense, even though they gave up a decent amount of points to the Lions, especially towards the end when it kind of got out of control, I thought the Vikings defense put up a good fight against them, regardless. And I think they're gonna come to play. And I hope Sam Darnold is able to lock in and feed Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison, because there were a couple of really like bad moments in that game where you saw the replay and he was just missing them wide open in the end zone. So if he's going to be able to find those targets, those guys are going to get open. So the question is, can Sam Darnold perform? I'm going to say yes. I'm going to say the Vikings win in a close one as well, 24-21, and go to, I guess, in our situation, they wouldn't actually play the Lions in the next round because the Commanders upset, and so they would actually play them. But that would mean that they would play the Eagles. So, um, man, I'm excited for some postseason football, Xavier. Do you have any plans for watching, or are you just gonna kind of be watching the games as you go about your days?
My dad said if the Eagles win, we might go watch the game. So
Oh
if they do,
wow.
it'll be exciting.
Okay, so you're definitely rooting for the Eagles then.
Yeah.
Okay.
And also, I just saw something. The LA Wildfires, they might have to move their game,
Yeah,
SoFi.
I heard about that. They might go down to Arizona depending on how the games go. So hopefully everybody is doing all right out there in Los Angeles and is able to get out safely. But that's gonna do it for this episode of This Week in Football. Thank you very much, everybody, for watching. Xavier, you have any last words before we go?
Peace.
All right, peace, everybody. We'll see you for the divisional round.